Welcome, everyone, to Bridging Perspectives, Cultivating Pluralism in the Classroom. I'll read the abstract off real quick, and then we'll go right into our conversation here. For those watching on YouTube and Twitter, X, please feel free to comment on the live stream, and we should be able to respond in real time. So, as students nationwide anticipate the start of a compelling new school year, our distinguished panel explores the inspirational and actionable dimensions of embedding pluralism within educational settings. Mike Whitenton from Interfaith America will outline innovative approaches his organization employs to equip institutions in navigating differences, spanning religious, cultural, and ideological realms to foster collaboration and deeper mutual insight. I will introduce this engaging my point-counterpoint methodology designed to instill in students the discipline of empathetic perspective taking. Matt Watson from ProSocial Workers will examine the profound implications of viewpoint diversity and bridge building skills in professional spheres and interpersonal dynamics. Mike, Matt, it's a pleasure to have you. We're looking forward to this conversation. So we'll get it started with asking Mike first, what characterizes a genuinely inclusive and resilient educational ecosystem in practice?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a great question. And the way we think about this at Interfaith America is, in a word, is pluralism. So for us, that looks like respect for diverse identities and divergent ideologies. And important to point out, like even the ones you don't like, I can say more about that. But so respect for divergent ideologies and diverse identities, mutually inspiring relationships across difference, and cooperation across deep differences on projects based on shared concern. So we get that respect, relate, cooperate, which is easy to say and hard to do across an educational ecosystem. In a perfect world, it's not just in one spot, right? So we're seeing that happen across student affairs, staff, faculty, students, and senior leadership, right? So it doesn't feel like anybody is swimming upstream. We see sometimes like where it's just one or two parts of campus that are working in this way. It's difficult to do in the long term. And then we can talk, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but practically that looks like cultivating skills around distinguishing the difference between discomfort and harm. Very important, right? Because if you feel like you're actually being harmed, you're going to act very differently than if you just think, oh, this is pretty uncomfortable right now. This conversation is uncomfortable. Developing empathetic listening, story sharing. We couch most of our bridge building work in story sharing, and also navigating tension constructively.
How do you think we got here? I mean, I grew up at a time where it was sticks and stones, maybe break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And now, I think if you were to poll most of America, they would say that words are sometimes worse than sticks and stones.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I can't quote the study, but there's a study, and it does say that. Yeah, I mean something like that, at least equivalent. Yeah, that a large portion of folks feel like that they're equivalent. So I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. I think of the work of Kurt Gray out of the Ohio State University. He's got a book called Outraged. He talks about concept creep there. That might be relevant. That essentially our brains are wired for detecting harm. That this is his thesis, and that there's kind of a harm quotient, and the safer things get, that quotient is going to be met. So the concept of harm itself grows. It's not my area, but maybe, I don't know. What do you think? I'm curious.
Yeah, I personally think that it's the absence of actual harm. Everyone needs to feel like they're the protagonist in their own story. And so absent an antagonist, you feel like you need to make something up. And it's a natural human inclination to feel like you're overcoming something. And so when, we're living in really peaceful times, at least in America we are, we're living in technologically the most advanced times that none of our ancestors could have ever predicted.
Yeah.
And that brings with it a certain level of privilege. And with privilege comes safety. Yet there's an internal desire to still feel like we're defeating something or someone. And perhaps we're inventing that which we aim to defeat. And it just, maybe that's what's going on, is my opinion.
It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that oh, Matt, go ahead. I saw you came off mute.
No, I just agree with that. I would just concur that that to some degree we just naturally distrust others. It requires a little bit of work to reach out, to take some initiative. I also believe that technology and how we're the technological evolution that we're experiencing has interfered with our ability to engage people in real time, to engage one another interpersonally rather than just through text or technology and so forth. And so I think those that while we're advancing in some ways thanks to technology, we're also losing some things to just bridge differences, and distance oftentimes invites distrust in those natural ways of connecting with people, whether it's in faith communities or interest clubs or those things that previously brought us together. Those things are not as prominent as they were in prior generations for a variety of reasons, but I think that contributes to it as well.
It's an interesting problem to have, just real briefly, because if generally we're on the mark here, that that things are, generally speaking, safer, and generally speaking people have an increased sense of harm.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tricky thing to untangle, right? Like, because what do you do? I mean, it's not my area, but PTSD rates are high, very high, and those are real. And so navigating that in the classroom becomes extremely important, to do that with care, while also reminding them, trying to undo that, like, look, this person has views that feel threatening, and maybe your nervous system is telling you that, like, you're under threat, but really you're just having a conversation, right? And you're in the classroom. Nobody's attacking you.
Yeah.
The term trauma, I feel like, has experienced the greatest amount of concept creep. That and narcissistic personality disorder. Anyone you don't like has narcissistic personality disorder, but trauma seems to be bleeding into every little thing. I think I saw a TikTok the other day where this young lady someone ate her ice cream and she was hoping to come back home and eat that ice cream, and now that's trauma. It's obviously a joke, but the fact that we throw it around means that people who've actually experienced trauma, the T in PTSD and the full PTSD, I wonder if those folks feel somewhat diminished as a result.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I think, Mike, I'd like to hear from you about, like, Interfaith America and how it came to be, and sort of the business plan, and what is the scope, and what is the goal?
Sure. So Interfaith America started about 25 years ago as Interfaith Youth Corps. It was founded by Ibu Patel, and he's still with the organization as our founder and president. We have been doing religious diversity work ever since. We started in higher ed, and so our deepest roots are in the higher ed space. But we also work in civic sectors and in workspace or workplace sectors as well. We have a team dedicated to faith and health. I'm on the higher ed team, so within higher ed, we've got a team's dedicated to working with senior leaders and students and educators, student affairs staff, and faculty. And I work with our faculty and oversee all of our faculty work. We believe that institutions we're in the business of building institutions and seeking institutional change. And so we try to do that by working with all aspects of a university. And we believe that when that happens, that's when actual, like I said, actual change occurs. So we try to get universities to adopt a multi-tiered approach to cultivating respect, relationships, and cooperation across deep difference.
How do you cultivate a relationship across, let's say you talked about religious diversity. There are some religions who feel like they are just the complete opposites of one another. What kind of space needs to be created or is created in order for all parties to feel safe enough and welcome enough to state their sides?
That's a great point. A great question. Yeah. So it depends on the context, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if we're in a classroom, we have kind of a discrete, it doesn't have to be a classroom, but something that's a discrete kind of space, either rhetorical or physical space. We think, first things first, it's best to have like authentic relationships where you can start them. So that may not look like talking about the thing that divides you, at least not now, right? In fact, it probably won't. Robert Putnam, he's got this idea that's like my pal Al, where like you're in I'm going to get this wrong, but something like you're in a sewing club with Al, and you've been in sewing club with Al for months, and then you find out that Al is, I forget whether Al is a particular religion that's off-putting, or if he voted for something that's off-putting. But anyway, once that happens, you're like, oh, I didn't know that about Al. Right, but Al is more than just who he voted for or how he worked with or whatever. He's Al, my buddy from Sewing Club, and there's a lot of wisdom in that, right? So one of the things we talk about is helping people fall back on relationships, and the fact that you don't have to talk immediately about the thing that divides you. You will get to that, right? But the differences that people experience are both irreconcilable and important, right? So you've got somebody who is a, Jane and a cattle rancher, right? Two different folks, not going to agree on eating meat, but they might well be part of the same environmental club, because both their Jainism and his cattle ranching ism leads him to both to care about the environment, right? And so it can be both, right? They're both irreconcilable and important.
Yeah. Matt, did you want to chime in as well? I think you've talked in great detail about just the profound implications of viewpoint diversity and bridge building skills.
Sure. So, Mike, what I'm hearing you say is kind of the common ground. Acknowledge the things that are different in one another, but also try and find common ground. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and like not diminish the things that are different, right? Like let those stand. Yeah.
So practice in some ways kind of radical acceptance of those differences. Perspective taking, just taking an open stance to others. Is that?
Yeah, with the caveat that I think that radical acceptance at the very least is at the level of behavior, right? So it is a fact that we are not all going to think that somebody else's perspective is like equally valid. Not always, sometimes, but not always. So we talk about the importance of respect, at least at the level of behavior. I'm gonna behave with decorum with you, right? But that doesn't mean that all beliefs are all perspectives are inherently equal, that kind of thing. Yeah, not a mushy middle sort of thing. There's a lot of room for disagreement. But go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so starting there with finding common ground, how do you navigate differences? How do you encourage the navigation of differences and appreciating those differences, or not just accepting them, but in a pluralistic world, coming to recognize and appreciate them?
Yeah. So we do a lot of this through story sharing, right? So we teach folks to listen. Most people don't have any skills with listening, but so can we cultivate how to listen with our full self, and then we teach people to share stories, right? So conversations around, for instance, abortion, right? Like to dive right in on a divisive one. I've seen that go from here's my perspective on abortion to somebody leaning in and saying, tell me more about how did you come to that perspective? Like, tell me a story from your life. And it really didn't have anything to do with abortion. It had to do with growing up in a particular context, and those stories contextualize things, right? And then maybe you don't agree with that person, but you do have a sense that if I had the experiences that person had, I very likely would believe the way that they do. There's this kind of like moral humility piece to it that comes when we open ourselves to the stories of other people.
So life experiences, in essence, understanding one another, empathizing a little bit, listening. Is that right?
Yeah.
So humanizing those differences rather than demonizing them, rather than dismissing them or just ignoring them. It's kind of what I'm hearing you say is being curious and humanizing, really seeing the humanity in someone's own experiences and the why behind their belief.
Always.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense in terms of what we try to do within pro-social workers is we just maintain that pro-social stance rather than, infusing ourselves or trying to impose a particular idea, value, ideology, that we just try and maintain that curiosity and have an actual experience with someone, just as, to some degree how we are today. So are there any limits to that? Or, some might say that, we're platforming bad ideas, or if you want to demonize somebody, that we're platforming true, evil or falsehoods, those kinds of things. How would you parameter say, okay, are there any parameters to or limits to that degree of acceptance or openness or curiosity?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple different ways that I would want to try to answer that. The first would be at an interpersonal level, right? So, and then in a classroom, right? So those are, I think, two different things.
Mm-hmm.
But so at the interpersonal level, we get the question a lot, like, where do you draw the line with bridge building? In fact, I don't remember the last time I was in a space where someone didn't ask that question, right? It's so top of mind, and for good reason, right? Like, talking to people who believe very differently can sometimes be very scary. And back to our earlier conversation about harm, and it makes good sense, right? And also, like, to name, there is a bona fide harm happening in the world, right? That doesn't look like words. That's far more than that. So, that being said, I usually answer it something like this: like, look, I'm not here to tell you where to draw the line or who you have to bridge with, and I don't think anybody should do that. I think that for me, I try to steer away from big, like, kind of absolute statements, but that feels negligent to me. Like, that feels like that could really blow up in somebody's face if you teach somebody to bridge and say you got to bridge on everything. Most of us have a line. Not everybody has a line. Some people, if you want to be at the table, you can be at the table and we'll have a conversation about anything, and that's great. And then there are other people who have issue X, Y, or Z that they are not going to talk about. And I think we got to say that's totally fine, right? Like, bridge where you can. I'm a big fan of Valerie Kaur's work, where she talks about from her sick faith. I'm not sick, but she talks about it from her sick faith, that you're a part of me that I don't yet know. And if that is true across the board, that we're all part of each other, really what matters is that everything is being bridged. It matters less who's doing the bridging. And I find that convincing. I also think of, on the other hand, I think of John Powell, Greater Good Science Center, who he said in an interview on Interfaith America's podcast, he was asked a question like this, and he said that wherever you draw the line, that's the limit of your growth. And like, you can draw it wherever you want, but you can't grow past that line. I think that makes a lot of sense. But it may be that somebody is like, you know what? I'm good. I don't need to grow there. And that's okay, right? Like, maybe they'll change, maybe they won't. Now, that being, that's at an interpersonal level. In a classroom setting, though, I think it's a little different. So in a classroom setting, one, I want to emphasize, like, professors should be in charge of what's in their syllabus, full stop. But if a professor was asking me this question, then I think I would say something like this, like, we all are always making decisions about what's in our syllabus. I was a professor for 10 years before I took this role, so like, everybody's making decisions. But if you choose to exclude a view that you don't like, you got to know somebody else is talking about, right? These views that people are afraid of being platformed, they're already platformed on YouTube, on X, everywhere else, right? Like, so it might be that you decide for pedagogical reasons that you don't want to get into it in this particular class. And hey, I trust your decision on that. You're the one who knows your classroom better than me. But if it's because you don't want to platform it, people are going to be talking about it anyway. And if you're not the one leading the conversation, you have no control over the way that topic is dealt with. You don't have any control over providing counter arguments, right? Not every view is equal, right? So those are my I don't find the don't platform, like, we don't want to platform persuasive for that reason, because it's already been platformed. If it's in the air enough, you're not adding to it, because look, again, I'm a professor in heart. Your class of 30, you're not platforming this beyond X. It's already out there.
Have you experienced the concept of right side, wrong reason? So you mentioned abortion, for example, and this is something that has come up in some of the classes that I've taught too. I still remember the first time it happened. A student said, "You know what? Fine, I'm pro-choice," because many students were in that class.
Yeah.
And then we were like, "Okay, well, whatever. Like, that's not what this point. The point of this is." And then he says, "You know why I'm pro-choice?" And like, we're all like, "Yeah, okay, why? You can certainly say so if you're comfortable." And he said, "Well, 70%," and holds up his phone, 70% of children vote like their parents. So if abortion results in fewer people who believe in abortion in the future, then yes, I'm in favor of it. And then the other classmates have obviously were like, "Well, that is, Nafees, you said like that's an example of a bad faith." And I struggle with that, because is it really bad faith, or is it a student really digging in, thinking, why do so many of my classmates think a certain thing, and they're sort of like putting me on the on blast for thinking this way? Then fine, I agree with you, but despite me being on your side now, quote unquote, I'm there for all the wrong reasons as far as those students were concerned. I wanted to get your thoughts, and Matt, yours as well, on right side, wrong reason. Don't even know if that's the right way of saying.
Yeah. So it's an interesting. I mean, I think in some ways, as long as I think it depends on the parameters of the classroom discussion, right? Like, I'm a big fan of having communication agreements that kind of level set. We haven't talked about that yet, but if it's part of the ethos of the class to kind of throw out these ideas and kind of follow them to their logical conclusion for the sake of provocation, then great. If, on the other hand, it's part of the ethos of the class that, like, we, as often is the case in these communication agreements, I'm going to speak for myself. We're going to assume good faith. I'm going to make good faith arguments. I'm going to steel my case. Then that's a different kind of story, which I think for me kind of just emphasizes how important communication agreements can be, or communication norms, or whatever language we want to use with that. But I'm curious to hear what you think, Matt.
Do you universally use those when you were in academia? Did you start every class, regardless of the topic, with those communication agreements?
So I taught in humanities, so just as a side note, like I wasn't teaching geometry or something. Although I don't know, maybe geometry is contentious and we need them there. I usually started the semester. We have at Interfaith America, we have kind of a vibey sort of like invitation to, like, this is the kind of space that we're going to create together. And I used that as kind of a starting point because I used our materials long before I started working at IA. But if we were going to have actual constructive conversation across differences in that class, then we would take time to set those up as a class together. It takes a lot of effort, and you build in a day in your syllabus if you're going to do it. And I wouldn't try to build them together in a class above 20, and even that's a ton of work. But I would do two things. I usually start with a kind of a general blueprint, like, we're going to talk for ourselves and not for groups. We're not going to interrupt. We're going to put away our phones. We're not going to make faces when somebody says something, those sorts of things. We're going to keep what students say in here confidential. If it's shared in here, it stays here. That became especially important the hotter things got on campus. I stopped teaching in 2024, so it seems like a much different time in higher ed than even now. But and then I would invite them, get it to where everybody agrees. I'd also then ask them, I kind of invite them to, like, is this okay? Like, are you okay with me bringing us back? Because people are going to cross these. This is going to happen. When it happens, how do we feel about me naming it and bringing us back? And I was going to do it anyway, but the act of saying, are you okay with that? Do you welcome that? I saw that helped everybody kind of chill out so that they could relax and just be present in the class. So yeah, to answer your question very succinctly, Matt, in the last year, yeah, in all of my classes. That wasn't in response to something going really poorly. It was just that I saw that it worked.
Right. So you would just collectively develop these norms, these communication agreements. People would essentially, you'd come to consensus in the class. Is that right?
Yep.
And if somebody didn't agree with those things, you would just kind of navigate or refine them and arrive at something that's kind of just acceptable for all.
Yeah.
And then if it didn't materialize, or if it didn't work out, you ask them, how do you feel about me bringing it back? And that seemed to work.
So at the beginning, when we got everybody on, we'd have the list, right?
Yeah.
And then we'd say, hey, how do we feel about this? Yeah. Can I get a thumbs up from everybody that you're going to do your best to abide by it? Yeah. Okay. And then I would say, in that same moment, over the course of the semester, we're going to violate these norms, right? That's going to happen from time to time. We're going to try and we're going to fail. And when that does happen, do I have your permission to bring us back? So I'm not singling anybody out here. Just at the start, is everybody okay with that? And nobody. Honestly, like, what are they going to say? But rhetorically, it was important.
Yeah.
And I never saw anything, and it never went poorly. And usually they're policing themselves, right? Like they make a base and be like, something about group norms, I think.
Yeah. So you never had a situation where it deteriorated to the degree that you couldn't bring it back?
No.
Really?
No, because we did the norms. Had we not had the norms,
okay.
Had we not taken time to, like, I wouldn't personally, like, if we were having conversations across difference, we always did at least 20 minutes on how do we listen. Always. Never saw it go sideways. And keep in mind, we talked about reproductive issues, including abortion and IVF, the role of firearms in American life, affirmative action, immigration. I'm sure I'm forgetting one, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There wasn't deep difference. It wasn't that there wasn't deep difference and deep, profound parting of ways on what they believed about those issues. It's that when somebody said something that made them flip out internally, they leaned forward and said, "Can you tell me more about that? How did you come to that perspective?" And then, kind of like clockwork, they tell a story and then like, "Oh, okay." I mean, still it's upsetting, but like, they're not saying this out loud, but internally, still that's very upsetting. But okay, I can see why you'd believe that. Yeah.
Now, one of the questions from our commenters is, in terms of humility and curiosity, are students ever asked to put themselves in someone else's story to generate that empathy?
Yeah, I'm just reading it because I do better when I actually read it here. Yeah. So we, as an organization, we don't do this, but Narrative 4 does. Do we know Narrative 4? They have a program called the Story Exchange, and you pair off. You do this with a trained facilitator. Don't just kind of like wing it, because for reasons you'll see. But you pair off and you share your story with somebody. Over about 4 minutes, and they ask all the questions they can, and then you come back to a group. And like Matt, if you and I were paired off, we'd be in a circle, and it would come to me, and I would say, "Hi, my name is Matt, and this is my story." And then I would launch into the story in first person, feeling it as much as I could feel the way that you explored it. I've done this. A deeply powerful experience.
Yeah, I employ the point-counterpoint methodology in my courses, which should be published fairly soon. Hopefully a book coming out on it as well. And the idea around it is nothing necessarily novel, but it seems like a reinvention of, old school education is seen as novel. And the idea around it is simply that if you are a student who has made a wonderful point, now it is your responsibility to counterpoint yourself right on the spot. In fact, assignments that I've had in my classes, my Freedom of Thought course, related to vlogs. So you record yourself 30 seconds talking about abortion. That was one of my topics as well. And for 30 seconds, or 25 seconds, speak as pro-choice, let's say, and then pause for another 25 seconds, speak as being pro-life. And your grade will be dependent on how well you fooled me. The idea isn't whether or not what you believe is being shared with the greatest conviction, at least in my opinion, in an educational setting. My opinion, an educational setting is designed to consider every viewpoint as though it is the viewpoint. And of course, students, adults, right, in the college environment, adults know who they are and probably know who they're going to be moving forward. So I challenge my students to to speak on behalf of the opposition at the same level of strength as they do on behalf of favoring you.
Yeah,
Yeah, and,
I think that's great.
yeah, it seemed to work. I'm also curious about, so moving from philosophy and religion classes, how would these sorts of approaches, from Interfaith America, apply to, let's say, like sociology, psychology, and social work?
Yeah, so I mean, uh, they're not. They're not tied disciplinarily, right? So it would look like you're still setting up. And psychology would be like, I mean, depending on how practical the course is, if it's like, it could be even more seamless, right? Like if upper level courses, potentially you've already got empathetic listening under your belt. The students already have that under their belt. But it could look like setting up, 5 minutes at the two things. One, you could integrate it fully into your course, which would be a longer conversation, and happy to have that. But a real low lift would be, you spend time, you let them know that, hey, like perspective taking is super important, and one of the ways that we do that is by deep listening, and then you practice it, and you could even tie it to readings. So they come in with the reading for the day under their belt, and you ask them to, I don't know, tell a story from their life that came up for them while they were reading. I'm just making this up off the cuff. And then they spend 5 minutes listening to each other's stories. It's that it can be that simple, right? It doesn't have to be a profoundly sophisticated pedagogical implement. Of course, it can be, but since I didn't teach sociology or English, that's a harder lift for me on the fly.
Yeah, there are disciplines that are ideologically prescriptive, and I happen to be in one of them, in social work, which has historically been ideologically prescriptive. But I'm Matt as well. We're working on creating spaces for viewpoint and political diversity, but it's an uphill battle.
Right.
And so you'll also see some students coming in saying, "Well, I know the right answer is this."
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because of the particular class that they're in, right?
That's right.
If they're in social work classes, generally social work, the NASW, the CSWE, many social work organizations have been clear as far as where they stand on, let's say, on the topic of abortion. Like it's very clear where they stand. And so some students will come in saying, yeah, we can have a conversation. Yeah, we could do point-counterpoint activities on it, but I know what the right answer is because I've done some background research on social work. And then as faculty members, as professors, or as instructors, sometimes we feel like creating a space of viewpoint and political diversity, not only do you have to convince the students that it's a good idea, we also have to convince our field, that the very courses, the discipline that we're teaching, that it's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and right, like I have to think that social work is full. There are social workers who hold views that are contrary to the norms of social work, right? Like, and so how do we train people to both, in the absence of shifting those norms, how do we train people to be both their authentic self in ways that are professionally appropriate, like in terms of with clients, but navigating the spaces like classrooms? I mean, that's a fantastic question. It also isn't all that different than what some religiously affiliated, theological schools deal with, right? Because professors of theology at some schools anyway, they've got statements that they have to sign as by virtue of being a faculty at a particular institution, and yet they are human beings, and human beings have a way of not always abiding by statements, like it's one of those things, anyway, different because those are ideologically kind of different spaces, right? Like social work trends. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but trends to the left, and those religiously affiliated schools that have statements tend to trend to the right. But similar kind of tension in terms of navigating norms.
But there may be conflicts, values conflicts. If there are 6 core values in the NASW Code of Ethics, and sometimes, the values themselves may come into conflict with one another. And I mean, that's just part of the human condition, is that at any period of time in any different context, our own values may shift or take a different application from time to time. And we may, regret that and have to kind of rewind and recognize, oh, well, my choices or my decisions, my perspective has evolved or changed. What role does extending grace to those who may have, erred or shifted, or what role does grace play in the classroom?
I want to answer this. I think this is a lovely question, but say more about what you mean by in the classroom, because I thought I knew you were going, and then you shifted in the classroom, and now I'm not sure. Say more.
So I'm in the classroom and I'm having this discussion, and I realize, as we're talking it through with the class, I find myself changing my mind. I'm persuaded otherwise. And before I was taking this, strongly held position, and, I may have been wrong, but, do I have to atone for that? Do I have to, or do I have to humiliate myself, or do I have to, how might students be able to extend grace to one another when there's less than perfect, less than artful ways that they communicate with one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has got to start with the professor, right? Like the professor can normalize how very common it is. I mean, I don't mean like when it comes up. I mean like over the course of the semester. That like when we think critically, our minds often change. When we open ourselves to evidence, our minds often change. When we have experiences that have nothing to do with the course material, our minds often change about the course material, right? Like we are so complicated. And I don't know, like even celebrating it, like I've taken to, I mean, it's only slightly adjacent to this, but like we talk about normal a lot in our work. We talk about normalizing respectful disagreement. That like we are going to disagree.
Yeah.
In fact, it's kind of remarkable when we agree. If you think about just how complicated people are, and depending on the topic, right? Like read the room. But I do like celebrating it. Like if we find like a pretty strong difference, like, hey, look, we found it. All right, like, okay, everybody, let's settle in. All right, you go, and then just kind of lean in. So I wonder, is there a way for us to kind of be in a respectful way, playful, and hold loosely these even cherished, conclusions? Because I mean, my goodness, like if we as people who have been doing this for a long time are still kind of wrestling with things and changing our minds, how much more 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds? I mean, my goodness.
Yeah. How when in our world today where there's a lot of fear of speaking up, there's a lot of self-censorship.
Yeah.
How do you address that? How do you address self-censorship in the classrooms or in these dialogues?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. One, I mean, I think communication norms can be really helpful here, and patience. And I'll say more about that. So it may be that, in a class that I taught, I'm just realizing I need to be careful about like how much details I give on this particular one. But just because it was from my own, like there are students that would know who I'm talking about. But generally speaking, when we talk about confidentiality, students can be really nervous about like, well, for how long, right? Like, is it just now? Because what about after the class? So like take your time with elucidating what it means to be that we're going to keep things quiet for students, right? Because if you don't specify student confidentiality, it's very easy for a student to think you mean also don't say what I'm saying in class. And then that can go sideways very quickly, just in terms of like a student not feeling like they can be themselves because they're afraid that you, as the professor, you've created a situation in which they're kind of trapped. I've seen that with students. So, but I think too, like just being patient, I've taught for 10 years and there was, thousands, I don't know how many, there was a 4-4 for 10 years. So a lot of students. And a lot of them were super nervous up front because of this, right? Like, I don't feel like if they knew who I was, or frankly, if you knew who I was, Dr. Whitenton, what I believed, up front. But if you just kind of give them space, yeah, that's like, hey, like, I don't take risks you don't feel like taking. Then, often they'll kind of soften up. But also, like, be careful with the subjects you choose, right? So if you're having these dialogues, know your institutional context in terms of what topics you personally are willing to bring up. And then kind of an extra step is to do something like ranked choice voting with students. Let them choose in ways that minimize how much that maximize how much autonomy they feel, right? So I've seen that go really well, because what you don't want is for a student to be like, to take, like they're like, what I can't talk about my position on immigration. And there are some very like potential, very serious consequences around immigration conversations right now on college campuses. And so, you don't want a student to be like, well, you chose immigration and now what do I do? Like, because I've got to do this for my grade. You don't want them to be there, right? It's not, it's not that
double bind
probably that you're talking about immigration. But if you let them choose, then you have better buy-in.
I want to, you said the word grade, and right away I thought, like, what are students in college for? And, having conversations with my students, past and present, and now with the fall semester coming up, some future students as well, some of the conversations are around like, why are you here, right? What are you trying to get out of this? And the stock go-to answer, the correct answer is, I want to learn as much as I can about social work policy and this random. And then we dig deeper. Once they get to know me, I get to know them. And we find out that the grade is prioritized above all.
Sure.
I've been teaching for 10 years as well. It seems like you and I got started right around the same time.
Yeah.
I am convinced when students say that the grade is the number one thing. Because if you learn a lot and still get an F, you have nothing to show for it.
Right.
But if you don't learn much and you have an A, then at least you have that to show for it. So I want to get your thoughts on, well, specifically this question. Not all faculty members are going to be inclusive of viewpoint and political and diversity, religious diversity as well, right? So they're not going to be open to that. What advice would you give to a student? And I'm telling you the advice that I would give, right?
Yeah.
I would give this advice to my students, saying, priority number one is your grade. So if you need to cosplay as something that you aren't in order to get the best grade possible, if you need to agree with your professor's viewpoints in order to get a better grade, even though you don't genuinely do so in real life, then the grade is number one. And I'm curious as to whether or not you would give something similar of advice, or what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, what an interesting question. I mean, I guess so, right? Like, and by that I mean, like, what a sad situation. But if you're paying all this money and you're wanting to get a degree and you've got professional school aspirations. Like, I'm not so idealistic that I think that you being yourself and like what is like showing the professor is, but my goodness, like if we're there, then wow, that is a broken kind of state of affairs. If we have students having to mask in ways to, especially if we're talking about, I mean, hopefully somebody who's teaching bridge building isn't also that type of professor, but especially if somebody is like having to go through these like conversations pretending they're somebody else, I mean, that's heartbreaking. And I mean, I'm talking to, it sounds like two social workers. You can tell me the kind of like legitimate damage that would do to somebody, but woof.
Mike,
Yeah, sure. I mean, but man, I hope that we don't have a lot of that going on.
I am that student, Mike. Yeah, so masters, and I won't go too much into it because I know time is running out. But between my master's and the early part of my doctorate, once I realized I was being graded not on how I think for myself, but whether or not my ideas and ideologies are aligned with my professors, I knew exactly what they were looking for, and it was most of the time disingenuous to who I was. Now, my story has a happy ending because that's when I realized I want to be a professor because I want to work toward similar to what Interfaith is doing and creating spaces for viewpoint and political diversity because I did not get to experience that myself. So my story has a happy ending, but I don't know how many stories have this happy of an ending. And so I wonder if people are walking through life thinking that they're just wrong all the time, when in reality, much of this is subjective, and there are just as many people who fall on side A as side B.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And my goodness, man, like I get that, like that was a long time ago, but that must have been really hard.
Yeah, worked out good though, so I'm happy about that. But I really appreciate, yeah, Matt, go ahead.
It was motivation to for where you're at right now, and things work out. Mike, I am interested a little bit on why you think storytelling and communication norms or communication agreements work. And even though they didn't work, even though you never experienced them not working, once we can identify kind of the why, could we hypothesize about when they might not work, even though maybe you haven't had that experience yet?
Yeah, of course. And yes, obviously sometimes it doesn't work. I'm not making the claim that like this is foolproof.
Sure.
Right, so I have more to say about storytelling than communication norms. But my sense is that communication norms probably work because of some kind of group dynamics, probably. And it probably helps people feel safe knowing that we've all agreed, like out loud. It creates this kind of group cohesion. That's just my guess. But I don't know. That's my guess. And it also creates truthfully, it creates something of a punitive structure so that if these aren't abided by, there's like, at the very least, like you're going to be doing something that's bad, and so that probably plays a role for some people too. But more often than not, I think once people start to experience the connection that comes with taking in someone's story and sharing their own, it becomes kind of the positive reinforcement becomes enough. That being said, so there is actually quite a bit of research on why stories work. So in my former life, I studied ancient rhetoric, and I brought modern cognitive science into that for was studying character. But part of that had to do with narrative persuasion. Why do stories convince us? And essentially, what they do is they get around what we all have a counter argument reflex when we start hearing, facts that we find unconvincing, or a logical argument we don't find convincing. Immediately we come up with these counter arguments. Story has a way of getting around that, right? In a way by kind of preoccupying the part of our brain that doesn't that would make counter arguments. I mean, there's a again, Kurt Gray. He's got this is in his book Outraged, but he's also got an article that's something like stories are better at building bridges than facts, or something like. It's one of those articles that the title is like the whole thing. It's a multi-author article. But essentially, what they found is that if you line up a bunch of people and you say, if you wanted to believe, what would it take to make you respect the people that voted differently or whatever? And they're like, give me the reasons. And then so they get the reasons, and they just think something like, those reasons are stupid, and you're stupider than I thought because you believe those dumb reasons. Like, that's, even though we think that's what we want. Mm-hmm. But instead, if the person tells a story of, especially a story about a time where they were harmed, or they were afraid of being harmed, or they were worried this other person was going to be harmed, it has a way of being relatable. We all worry about that in some form or fashion, and we can map our own selves onto it really easily. And we then think like, oh, okay, well, still don't agree with you, but like, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Essentially, our brains are wired for story, and we mirror those stories. There's all sorts of stuff in the brain, but it's pretty solid that story works in ways that facts just don't.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, thank you, Mike and Matt, and we'll call it a day here for today. I'm sure there's a lot that we can continue to discuss, and hopefully we do so in the future.
Would love it.
Yeah. So, Mike, Matt, thank you again to our viewers and listeners. This has been Bridging Perspectives, Cultivating Pluralism in the Classroom. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.